Hi, I'm Rebekah, and I work as a ghost tour guide in one of the most haunted cities in the southern United States, Wilmington, North Carolina. Follow along with me. I'm going to show you some of the most haunting photos captured on my ghost tour, and then we're going to go back to those locations during the day to see if we can figure out what went bump in the night. I'm Rebekah, the Ghost Guide. How do you explain this? Let's take a closer look at this photo. As you can see, there's the top of my head as I'm in the middle of telling a ghost story. Great facial expression, I know. Most prominently, I see a guy's head with a top hat and hollowed out features. Here's also what looks like a face over there. It's a photo that seems to have more and more the longer you look at it. When I initially posted this to TikTok and Instagram, I got a lot of really cool responses. People were seeing faces, some people see skulls, and then of course my personal favorite kind of response. Here's the same location where the photo was taken during the day. It's an alleyway affectionately called Paradise Alley, but that's a whole other episode we'll have to get to later. Now, look over here. There's nowhere for somebody to stand inside, and while the window is clearly broken and the broken pieces do make shapes themselves, I drew over them, and when I compare them back to the original photo, they just don't match up. The same idea can be applied to the other side of the window. Yes, the glass is broken, and the apparition does seem to be appearing near those broken areas, but it looks different. So, who is this? In understanding that this alleyway has been in heavy use since the later part of the 1600s, and then looking back at fashion, it would appear that this man was from circa the 1840s according to how he is dressed. What was happening in Wilmington during that time? Well, it was and still is the port city. So down in this area would be warehouses, and it wouldn't be uncommon for a wealthy person to come down here to see what stock they had coming into their warehouse or buy goods. But here are the questions that we don't have answers for. What did he do down here? Was he traveling? Did he actually work down here? Was one of his businesses down here? Common exports of that time included tar, turpentine, pine, cotton, and the sad reality, people. Was he involved with this trading, this import and export? And did his dealings while alive ultimately lead up to his end? It appears to be a mystery. But hey, what do you think? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. How do you explain this? Let's take a closer look at the photo. At first glance, you might want to write this off as a lens flare, but lens flares don't appear to move unless the entire photo is moved as well. And here you can see a clear, steady photo. So what is this? When I first posted this onto TikTok, people were seeing anything from what they described as vortexes, to orbs, to shadow figures. That's a lot more than I initially saw, so let's revisit the photo. Now, as a disclaimer, I took this photo as a photo of a photo on a woman's phone. High tech, I know. In the photo, you may see her screen was a little cracked. I admit I'm not sure if I see shadow figures as clearly as others did, but for the sake of giving credit to those who did, I was able to use a bit of imaginative intuition and outline what they could have saw. Most notably, this possible face. If this is really there, that height would match the height of what many people appear to see in this location. Time to go back to where this photo was taken, but during the day so we can hopefully see and understand a little bit better. Welcome to the loading dock of what was the old Bullock Hospital. It would appear that the orb was on its way out between the bars of the ground floor window. I'm at the basement, or the loading dock level, as it once was. As this is a privately owned business, no one was up there at the time this was taken. Who is this? Hard to tell without a physical description. Some will say that the color of an orb may tell something about the emotion of the entity. Let's go with that idea for a moment. Now, when I think of energy having color, I immediately think of auras. If that's an indicator, this bright green may indicate a cross between communication, fear, and/or blockage. Others who classified this as a vortex say it was a naturally moving energy. So, where was it going? I'll give you a hint. I mentioned that this was a hospital back in the 1920s. What was happening in Wilmington during that time? Similarly to the rest of the United States, Wilmington was very much caught up in Prohibition. This is debatably even more intense as alcohol was one of the foundations of the city itself, as people were oftentimes paid in rations of rum. This was common in both sailing and the railroad industries. While this practice was lessened by the 1920s, the tradition of drinking was very much a popular reality. So, did people stop drinking just because the law said not to? No. This, as you can imagine, led to a high influx of crime. In response to this, you see a huge transition of the population moving from downtown to newly constructed suburbs. However, not everyone could move. And so when Bullock Hospital opened in 1922, it was a welcome sight to anyone who found themselves downtown, especially for children who had an entire ward down here. That's why I mentioned the height of the possible outline earlier. Doesn't look too tall to me. And where is the energy headed? The basement floor used to be a morgue. But hey, what do you think? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. How do you explain this? Let's take a closer look at the photo. Considering how fuzzy it is, it seems like this person did not mean to take the photo in the first place. As the tour guide is leaving the location, the person is likely putting their phone away. First of all, I'm not sure who or what that fog is. Could be part of the group, and we can't see the rest of them in the dark. Or it could be one of the ghost kids from the old hospital nearby. You tell me. Secondly, look up here. And this circle was actually made by the person who sent it in. I don't really feel like I need to explain this in too much detail because there's plenty of detail to be had. To me, it looks like a woman in a dress. Followers on Instagram and TikTok had a lot to say about what this person was wearing. People saw anything from a cloak to a veil to Edwardian or Victorian period clothing. Others suggested she may be a nun. Personally, I see a woman in a larger dress that may date back to the 1880s. To check myself, I drew 3 different outlines at 3 different zoom levels to try and see what features stick. Definitely the long billowing skirt with a possible bustle, a formal-looking top, and long, loose hair. If she's wearing a light-colored shawl, this would lean more to being of the Victorian period. If the back of her dress is open, this would therefore make her more of the Edwardian time. Go back to the location and try and find any clues on either who this was or if the picture is too good to be true. The tunnel in which the photo was taken is underneath the historic Murchison building, built in 1913. The purpose of the tunnel was to keep the loading dock open for what would later become the Old Bullock Hospital featured on one of my previous episodes. In fact, without the Bullock Hospital being one of our ghost tour stops, the entity may have never been captured. Who is this? As I mentioned, we don't have a specific story with this tunnel. However, in taking into consideration what this entity seems to be wearing, the clothing outdates the tunnel. However, before I get into what was going on in Wilmington at the time she could have been a part of, let me first address some of the comments from earlier. Firstly, the possibility that this could be a nun. While I see how people saw a nun here with what looks like could be an all-black dressing and long veil, on closer inspection, I personally see her uniform showcasing long hair, a possibly open back, and form-fitting clothing. That leads me to believe that this was a woman of mid to higher class that lived in the late Victorian or early Edwardian eras. What really seals the deal for me are these wide sleeves that sit right over her shoulder. The next mystery then would be over her hair. If not a veil, as what would be worn in Victorian mourning, it would appear her hair is down, which wouldn't be considered appropriate in this time outside of the home. Did she leave in a rush in her last moments? Or was her home nearby and has since been lost to time? Your guess is as good as mine. As I mentioned, the time period that she would have come from, the hospital wasn't in service yet, and the tunnel hadn't been built for its access yet. However, what I can share with you is some information on the time period she appears to have come from. The late 1800s was a time of change in Wilmington. There was an influx of European immigrants, for example. The port city was thriving off of transportation based off of sea-to-rail trade. Was this woman an immigrant who traveled the rough seas only to catch an illness that took her life in port? Perhaps she was the daughter or wife of one of the railroad barons whose wealth couldn't keep her from the inevitable. Whatever the reason, I think one thing we all can agree on is our gratefulness of her stopping by for a photo that night. But hey, what do you think? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I want to take the time to answer your questions. And right now, the most common question that I'm getting is, how do you know if it's a ghost that's shown up in the photo or video that you've captured? So I'm going to tell you some of the most common ways that ghosts show up in film. Personally, the most common way that I've seen ghosts show up in film is through things that are called orbs. They're little balls of light, understood to be reflections of the soul, not reflections of lights that you and I can see from a light bulb. Most common colors that we see with orbs are white, but I've also commonly seen them in shades of light green and light blue. Sometimes they're really small, and other times they can be large and kind of transparent. And on a rare occasion, they may just look like a face. But that could be depending on what you see and how you see it. The next step up from an orb would be, honestly, what many people call different things. Some people call them zippers, some people call them vortexes. It depends on how thick they are sometimes. Me, I just call them moving orbs, and we've already seen one of those on my second episode outside of Bullock Hospital. But I also commonly see them at graveyards, most commonly St. James Graveyard, where they seem to be popping up out of the ground. These can also be varying levels of transparency. I usually see them in white, but outside of the Bergen Wright House, for example, I see them in shades of blue and green. Fog is another common anomaly that we see on the tour and that many people also see in photos. Sometimes it's fog that'll sit right around the level of a tombstone, for example, out at St. James. Other times the fog can be billowing up to the sky. And some people will say that the fog is just in between and trying to take shape to look like the person that it's portraying. Oftentimes fog is seen in shades of white, but we've also seen it on the tour in shades of gray, green, and kind of a pinkish bronze. Another common occurrence are shadows or even full shadow figures. Some people will report seeing shadows just like you and I would see shadows in the sun, like what's behind me. Other people will report seeing shadows right in front of their face. So this could be something like the fog taking shape of a shadow, or maybe you're looking at a full-on anomaly. But some people believe that shadows may be spirits, whereas other people believe that they might be shadow people which may have never lived and died. They're just existing, if you will. As I mentioned earlier, some people claim to see just the faces themselves, and those faces might be in the orbs I talked about. But they could also sometimes be levitating. And this is one of those things where you have to wonder, is it something truly spiritual, like a ghost or something or another? Or is it just our mind playing tricks on us? Either way, it does make for a very interesting photo. Reflections off of surfaces such as mirrors or even windows are also a great way to capture different anomalies. We've seen anything from faces to orbs to full-on apparitions, oftentimes looking out of very old windows. Something about reflective surfaces can sometimes capture how something appeared when it was alive and maybe open up that kind of gate to be able to see it when it's walking around, when it's passed on. This is why I always recommend to my tour groups, when at old homes or homes that you know are haunted, take photos of the mirrors, take photos of the windows. You never know what could be staring back at you. Lastly, and I'd venture to say the most rare, is when you see a full apparition. This is an apparition that has facial features, but not only facial features, but you might be able to see what they're wearing, what time period they came from. As I said, these are rare. If they happened all the time, I think we'd have a lot less skeptics out there in the world. So if you capture one of these photos, wow. Welcome to winter at Boston Common, a place where Puritans would regularly hang people for not being pure enough. Hi, my name is Rebekah, and I work as a ghost tour guide in one of the most haunted cities in the southern United States. What am I doing up here in Boston? Catching a plane to London. But before I do that, let's find some ghosts during my 8-hour layover. Follow along with me for this special travel episode of Rebekah the Ghost Guide. When I travel, I always take public transit. What better way to get immersed in a city's culture? And it just so happens the closest subway stop to the Common is haunted. Lucky us. But before we get there, a little history. Did you know Boston has the oldest subway in the United States? And that Park Street station is part of the oldest route? So, who died here? To be honest, I'm not sure if anyone did. So, how is it haunted? My theory? Negative thought form spirit. These spirits never lived or died. They're just there. They survive off of the anguish of others, and they replicate the feeling. And any local will tell you that using the oldest subway in the States, built to hold a fraction of the people it does, regularly overcrowded, and with no way to fix it, that's a lot of negative energy over time. So don't be surprised if you hear a moan or a wail. It might just be there to make you a little bit more negative. Try and be patient, and good luck. Only footsteps from Park Street Station are the Boston Common. Established in 1634, this site served for public executions for over 175 years. When I first found this out, I asked, how could they turn this into such a pretty park? But remember, they do this all the time in historical cities. On my tour, I call it prime real estate. Nothing is to be wasted, so let's dive in. If you're ever to visit here, be sure to keep your eyes peeled and your ears open. If anything looks or sounds out of place, be sure to ask yourself just what you're taking in. It's understood that a number of Puritan victims, primarily women, are still seen walking these paths. But more on that later. Let's get a better idea of where we're situated. What's the story behind Boston? Settled by Puritans in 1630 as a way to escape English persecution for their beliefs, the Puritans were quick to settle their own state with their own strict rules. While flourishing as a colony, if you were not up to their code of conduct, you could wind up at the old hanging tree. Countless people had their lives cut short, for they, like the Puritans, would not walk away from their religious beliefs. That kind of murder stains a place. It laid tracks for many more years of bloody turmoil that is not secluded to this area or the Puritan time period. Only a block away from the Common is this unassuming brick house where Dr. George Parkman lived with his family in the mid-1800s. Parkman was a man who showed great promise even from a young age. He was a Harvard graduate and veteran of the War of 1812. Born to a wealthy family, Parkman was both thrifty and wise in his budgeting, up until his death. He was commonly seen walking the Boston streets rather than owning a horse. A well-known face such as his collected a procession of thousands to his funeral following his sudden murder. He was found by a janitor at Harvard Medical School. His body had been dismembered and his body was burned. At one of the largest nationally covered trials of the time, another professor was found to be the murderer. Despite justice being served, Parkman is still seen walking the halls of the last place he lived in. Nothing could bring him what he wanted the most: his life. Back at the Common, I'll introduce you to another life that was cut short in the pursuit of academia and science. Her name was Margaret Jones. She was a healer and medicine maker, something that was seen to distract from faith in Puritan eyes. It was ultimately a lie that led her to her hanging in 1648. A witch watcher claimed to spy a child running towards her, only to evaporate into thin air. Through pain and suffering, Margaret held on to her truth. She is one of so many who met their ends at this spot. To this day, you just might catch her trying to defend her innocence around this very area. Only a block from the old hanging tree is another well-known spirit who had more to say and do than their life allotted them to. The Omni Parker House, founded in 1855, remains as one of the most prestigious hotels in this part of the city. Much of this is in thanks to its hotel developer, Harvey Parker. In life, he was well known for being hospitable and very accommodating with his guests and his hotel. His death in 1884 would hardly change his dedication to this grand hotel. To this day, he is most commonly seen on the 10th floor annex, but you may very well catch him in passing, wishing you a pleasant day. It's not surprising that the Omni Parker House remains America's longest continuously operating hotel. My last story at Boston Common is one that is a little personal for me. It's a story of a woman who is still seen walking the area, wearing colonial dress and often in tears. Her name is Mary Dyer, and my connection with her comes from a common community of Quaker beliefs. Granted, I relate to a far more open-minded sect of Quakerism than what existed in Mary's day, but the core beliefs of peace, integrity, and equality have always remained the same. Mary was hanged at the same great elm tree that stood here till the storm took it down in 1876. She was murdered in 1660 by the same people who came to America to practice religious freedom. To this day, she can be seen heard crying, not just from her own fate, but for so many lives cut short due to religious prejudice. She is now honored with a statue at the State House. To end this episode, I couldn't imagine a better location than this, King's Chapel Burial Ground. Only a few blocks from Boston Common, you'll find the oldest burial ground in the city. It was established in 1630, the same year the Puritans came to settle the area. Since then, there has been plenty to keep the spirits up rather than keep them at rest. This used to be a common site for grave robbers, for example. At least one woman was beheaded so that she would fit into a snug coffin, and a number of people may have unknowingly been buried alive. Lastly, as icing on the cake, the tombstones have been moved no less than 2 times. So much for resting in peace. Thank you for following me around just a small area of historic Boston. All of these sites can be easily visited in one day, and I highly recommend talking to the folks at the Freedom Trail Visitor Center if you're looking for more information. As for me, I'm going to get inside before my southern coastal climate body freezes. Thank you. how do you explain this?
Well, if you look specifically...
Hold it. I'm Rebekah.
I'm Jay.
And this is
It
Rebekah
Real
the Ghost
and
Guide.
How to Deal.
Welcome everybody to this special crossover episode of Rebekah the Ghost Guide.
And is it real and how to deal? We're going to keep walking on top of each other.
Yeah, it's going to be great. Okay. One of the things that I really want to point out throughout my series is some of the photos that I'm receiving aren't always what we want them to be. Right?
Up to snuff.
I want people to know that I'm going about this as a way to hopefully prove videos or photos. However, I also want to take time to really look into photos that can be proven scientifically.
And it's good information for you to be able to put to the test as well. If you get a good photo or a good video, you can use these things to be able to say, oh, no, it's not real.
Exactly, and that is exactly what we do on Is It Real and How to Deal. But today, I've got a photo for you, and this photo caused quite a stir when I originally posted it on TikTok, because a lot of people were going back and forth on, was it real, was it not real, how, why not, all of that, alright? So the location is the Carolina Apartments. It is a favorite location on our ghost tour. It was completed back in 1903. Almost every floor has its own story. Yeah. The most famous story is Claude Howell, who lives on the 5th floor and is oftentimes seen on his balcony, usually not wearing any clothing. Yeah, he was an artist, right? Okay. Other stories include children on the 3rd floor. And this was very popular. They actually filmed the opening scene of The Conjuring, that's with the Annabelle doll, up there on the 3rd floor. Yep. And they were having all kinds of weird things happening, including the occasional laugh from a child. And then a bit darker, a shadow figure has been seen around the complex. And this shadow figure, to sum it up, is up to no good.
Yeah.
So plenty of things to really amp up what this photo could have been. And I think that's why so many people wanted to believe in it. And I'll be honest, I saw it and I was like, whoa! And then Jay saw it and you were like,
no!
In this photo, there's a lot going on, right?
Yeah.
Lots of cool lighting. It looks like spirits are just straight up leaving the building, right?
Yeah. My absolute initial thought is, nope, not real. The way you can typically find a good ghost photo, some really good paranormal photos, iPhones are good with this because of the live photo feature. I don't know what the Android equivalent of that is, so if you know, please let us know in the comments below.
Yes.
The live photo, what it does is it takes, like a half second or a third of a second, something like that. You can hold down the picture to...
It's more like a video
it's more like
made
a
up of frames.
Snippet of video.
Yeah.
So within that, you can go back and look at each individual frame. But what it also does, it eliminates camera shake. The first thing I want to point out in this video, which is the first problem I have with it, ignore all the light trails and just look at the building. See how shaky it is.
It's fuzzy.
Yeah.
And I will say, kind of offering another side of that, so I was actually on this tour where this photo was taken. And on the tour, there were 2 photos. They were back-to-back photos. The first photo was nothing like this. Like, it was clear. You could see the bricks, all right? Yep. There was no lighting like this, all right? And then the immediate second photo looked like this.
Right.
And this woman, and granted, human error, I get it. This woman swore up and down. She said, I did not move my phone. I didn't move it. It was not shaky. What would you say to that?
I say too bad, because that's what happened. Just to be very blunt about it, whenever you take a photo with a phone, your hand is never as still as you want it to be. Even looking right now, I can see my hand shaking. I don't know the actual term for it, but the micro shakes are something everybody has. It's what happens. If she's holding it like that, let's say you snap a photo, and then as you snap the second one, you're like, okay, we're good. You know? You let it fall. Or you snap the second one, maybe she's holding it at a weird angle and it shakes a little bit. That's the reason why everything is out of focus. The second thing I really have a problem with is every single one of these light trails, look at its origin point. Not where it's flowing from, but look at its origin point. You can see the door very clearly in this photo. Having been there myself, there's a light right over that door. One of the heaviest light trails starts where that light is, and then it travels up. The same with things in people's room. There's a TV there, there's a lamp there, there's a light there. All of them have that same starting point. And most importantly, every light trail in this photo follows the exact same path, which is another indication of movement.
So if you were saying, if the lights, for example, moved in different paths.
If the lights moved in different paths, if there was absolutely no fade in, most importantly, when you look for photos like this that are real, what you notice is there aren't just moving lights, there are orbs as well, stationary orbs. If we're gonna tie in is it real and how to deal rules into this, I'm giving it a 95-5 ratio that it's not paranormal in any way.
We've gotten better at math.
We've gotten better at math.
Doing this.
Slowly but surely.
Supposedly.
As much as I want it to be real, because this would be a lot of phenomenon, in a building that we know for a fact is actively haunted, it'd be great, but it's just not.
How could you replicate this photo?
Easy.
Yeah, if you were actually going to go out there and say, I'm going to catch a haunted photo, how would you replicate it?
What the difference is between still, the slightest shake, and serious shake is. And if I were to take a photo like this, I know that if I take a photo like this, it's going to be a little bit more shaky in my hand than if I have a better grip and take it like that. And then I can see it right now.
Caroline Apartments is at one of the highest elevations in the city of Wilmington, which is a stunning 43 feet above sea level. However, that being said, we're walking up the hill. Usually Caroline Apartments is one of the last stops on our tour. That's the farthest we go up. It's about 5 blocks walking.
So that's an hour and a half of walking in the first place.
Not entirely walking. We do stop to tell stories and
people
stuff.
People are tired.
Yeah,
you know?
Exactly. And sometimes they're hungry too. Sometimes they don't eat before the tour. They might be tired.
Yeah.
So that's another way that, you know, her phone may have been shaking. She may have not recognized it.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
If it were real, how would you deal?
Ooh.
With lights.
Yeah, right. With lights. If it were real, I'd say there's a lot of movers. Or that building is surrounded, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The thing that would give me pause, though, is that all of the reports that we not only have seen and read, but know about through personal experience, happen inside the building.
I've got a story for you.
Ooh.
This is dealing with ghosts on the outside of the building.
Okay.
These are photos that I will be going through a little bit later, photos that cannot be so easily described.
Yep.
One of the photos I have, it looks like there's kind of a shadowy figure looking down from the stairwell. I know you also caught thermal.
I caught thermal, but that was on the balconies.
That was helpful. Yeah.
And that's the thing. If I caught thermal specifically moving on the balcony.
There's a paranormal investigator on the tour. He had a spirit box hooked up to earphones, which good.
They're real loud.
Yeah. He said that as soon as I mentioned the children, he actually heard a little voice next to him saying, "Hi."
The kids are mischievous, but
they're
the kids
just
are
around.
nice. Yeah, they're just hanging.
They're just...
You can feel tugs a lot, tugs on your clothing.
The strange thing is, we don't know why the kids are there. Could be part of the graveyard, potentially. That building sits on what used to be the graveyard.
Yeah, the part of St. James graveyard that's actually showing is only a third of it.
Yep. I think we've debunked this photo.
Yeah.
I hope you have enjoyed this special crossover episode. And also check out, there is a new episode. It was released only 2 days ago of Is It Real and How to Deal.
Yes.
Go check it out. It's a lot of fun. It's a very different theme from how this series is going.
Right.
It's a lot more comedic, but also you see a lot more...
But it's a lot more data-based. So we take paranormal footage and we break it down and see if it is real. What is it and how to deal with it.
Thank you so much for following again for Rebekah the Ghost Guide, and I will be back next week every Thursday at 4 with more ghostly goodness. And right now, a really common question that I'm receiving is, are there different kinds of ghosts? And if so, what are they? One thing that I want to be sure to cover before I go into this is that this particular episode is not going to be going into what happens after spirits move on from the earth. As in, I'm not going to be going into the concept of heaven or any other religious-based kind of concept. This is strictly for the energies that stay on earth. That's not discounting any of anybody else's beliefs, but as those of you who follow me on TikTok will know, I do not get into my personal beliefs on what happens in the afterlife. There are energies that can be split into two main categories. The first category being those spirits, those souls, and I say souls that have actually lived on the mortal plane and died. Category number two are energies themselves. So these are not souls that have lived and died, these are energies. So we have souls and we have energies. Going into those who have lived and died, I break these up into subcategories. For example, a kind of spirit that isn't particularly powerful but does have a replay effect, that would be a residual energy. A residual energy or residual haunting is the kind of haunting that is expected. Like for example, a friend of mine, they used to live in a house where every morning at 7 a.m. they would actually hear someone going up their stairs. They could count on it almost like clockwork. Another thing that this might be is a clock actually stopping. Or if you always see something like the way that a person died. Some people actually see the way that somebody died in their home. That could very well be a residual haunting. These hauntings are understood to be more like a stain or a scar on a location. You can't necessarily talk to them or interact with them. You might feel their presence, you might feel that emotion, and I'll get into that as far as energies are concerned, but they are just there until otherwise cleansed out. Another category would be the intelligent category. Intelligent, I put into two other subcategories. You have the intelligent spirit that you can regularly interact with that may not know that they're dead. For example, if say you move into a home where the last person who lived there maybe died of old age and they don't recognize that they have died, they're gonna be pretty upset when they start to recognize your presence. Now, they might be really confused, for example, because they're not really gonna understand that somebody else has moved into their home because they're kind of on a different plane of energy at that point. But they're probably gonna try and move you out of the house because then they're thinking you're the ghost. And a really great example of this would be the movie The Others. Really do check that out. It's a really interesting perspective on who is the real ghost. Another form of an intelligent spirit would be those that know that they're dead. You can regularly interact with them. They may choose to like or not like you depending on how you live your life and how you interact with them. An intelligent ghost may be sticking around to look after a house, for example. One of my personal examples was we had the ghost of a woman in our previous home, and I think she was coming to understand that she was dead. There had been a few owners before us that had been there, but she was still very attached to her home. She didn't want to go. So those are the kinds of spirits you can interact with. Like you can ask them things like, do you know where my keys are? You might be able to ask them to turn on a light or to interact with other technology. These are not clear-cut categories either. There may be a ghost who might think that they're still alive, but might not fully understand that. A good example would be if you've seen the movie The Sixth Sense. You have ghosts that are anywhere between not knowing that they're dead into understanding that they're dead, or ghosts that are still in that middle area of they get the idea that they are dead, but they're still actively trying to work as if in the mortal world. And then the next layer or category, as we're moving up in powerful spirits, so to speak, I call these ancestors or ancestor guardians or guides. With these ancestors, they are not attached to mortal things anymore. Rather, they are attached to people. It's not necessarily a bad thing. They may actually be blood kinship, or they may be kinship potentially through a soul bond. You may have someone who maybe you were going about your life, they were going about theirs in the spiritual realm, and something about you called them. They're not so much attached to a present thing as much as they are there for your assistance. Some people will call these spirit guides. Some people will call them guardians. Some people will call them ancestors. But they're just on a different plane. They recognize that they're dead. They know they've been dead for a while, and they're just around for our benefit. And when you think about that, that's really cool. It's the concept that we're never really alone. We've got so much support around us if we just open ourselves up to it. The next level that you would have are the really higher spirits. Some people will call these angels. Some people will call these Loa. These are spirits who may have served us as ancestors at one point in time and have just grown and grown and grown from there. So these are the really old spirits, all right? These spirits may protect over an entire family. They may protect over an entire town or a city, or even something larger. Some beliefs actually believe that there are spirits specifically for all little things. So there could be a spirit for this house, for example. There could be a spirit of my neighborhood. There could be a spirit of the town of Wilmington. There could be a spirit for the Cape Fear River. And these spirits, they're very, very high. They may have at some point lived and died and moved on, or they may kind of be a merge of energy along with that. These are deities, so to speak. They are more all-knowing and oftentimes understand more than we can comprehend. That's how high that they are. I've talked about those who have lived and died. Now we're going to talk about those who have not lived or died, those that are energies. The first form of this, and I think it is the most common, it's something called a thought form spirit or a thought form energy. And these have different tiers as well. If you've ever gone into a place and you just feel an emotion that you didn't already have, and you have no logical explanation of why you would have that emotion, that's a thought form spirit. These can work in a number of ways. For example, I was just out at Helen's Bridge in Asheville, North Carolina. There is a thought form spirit there. I think that the ghost is still there, but I also think the thought form spirit is there. Before I even got there, I felt sad. And it wasn't just me. My mom was with me. She felt sad as well. It was something we couldn't describe. And then we got to the bridge and we were like, that's it. That's the reason. You could have thought form spirits that are sad. You could have them that are angry. You could have them that are chaotic. You could also have positive ones as well. Some people will describe going into a place of worship or a monastery or a place of meditation, and they just feel peace. They feel light. That is another form of a thought form spirit. Thought form energies can also follow people. It kind of works the same way. If you're ever around somebody and they just give you a particular feeling, and it's not their body language, it's just something about them. And it could be happiness, but it could also be sadness. A way for you to kind of recognize that is if you start having emotions that aren't yours. And it's not as if we're an empathic thing. It's not like anybody around you could be giving you that emotion. And you're having emotions that you may recognize are just a little off. If this is normal for you, then I wouldn't immediately go to the spiritual side. There is a whole psychological side that should really be looked at with any and all of this. I'm all for the science. I am all for the logistics. Look at that first. These thought form energies can follow people. They can permeate a space. They can permeate a person. I'm a big person on balance. Keep that balance up. You never want to be too much of one or the other, whether happy or sad. You always want to be as balanced as you possibly can be. And that's why regular cleansings and meditation and checking yourself for your own health, always keep that up. Another form of energies are what I call parasites. Parasites, they can work along with a thought form energy. They may be the reason for a thought form energy, for example, or a thought form energy could be the reason of them. Oftentimes when somebody's really down and out, that's when a parasite really likes to leech on. Parasite is an energy that eats off of you. and your emotions and your life. Parasites are oftentimes attracted to people who are already having unfortunate problems. For example, depression. Depression, while it can be explained neurologically or it might be explained environmentally, can also be explained spiritually. These parasites want to latch on to people who are already feeling down and out. That's an easy target for them. Parasites enjoy sticking around places of burial because people who go to places of burial are oftentimes really sad. And oftentimes I get all kinds of comments and emails from people saying that they think something has followed them home from a burial site. That's why there's no trouble in going to a burial site so long as you're respectful. You've got to be sure to cleanse yourself. You don't want anything following you back and potentially making it worse for you. Next up, some people will call them demons. I personally do not like the phrasing. Modern day constructs it as like this super powerful figure. There are different tiers of these other beings, and not all of them are bad, and not all of them are completely bad. Not all of them are perceived as animals. Some people see goats, things like that. In my experience, I have seen different kinds of creatures that I don't think were ever living and dying as souls. Many different cultures have different names for these kinds of higher beings. These can permeate a larger space as well. They can exist near a person or influence a person directly or influence the space. They can also influence larger things as well, economics, politics. I think people are so generally afraid of being possessed by something. These higher level spirits are not often solely caught up with individuals like us. They may be influencing world leaders. They're not so interested in fully taking us, mainly because they have better things to do. If you're looking at a possession, I would say oftentimes you're looking at a parasite that something else has kind of popped in on. Maybe you're looking at a thought form energy. All of these things, they're all trying to feed. All energy is trying to find its own energy to connect with, to feed off of. Oftentimes, if you're having, say, a full-on possession, that's likely not one thing at play. And it's likely not something that happened immediately. These are things that happen over time. A person has to be worn down in order to be moved into, to be influenced that specifically, that greatly. The main thing that I'll say with all of these kinds of negative things, check yourself. Don't be afraid. Be upfront. Be honest with yourself. Be honest with one another. And don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to state your ground, to say, this is my life and you're not invited. The reality is that these energies, the ones who have not lived and died, can influence those who have lived and died. So, for example, I've dealt with ghosts who need to get to that next level of being removed from the mortal realm in order to therefore shed their negative thought form energies or their parasites from the mortal realm. Sometimes it's like with what happened with Helen's Bridge, you have a tragedy and then you have negative thought form energy that kind of live in that space. You may also have a person that was alive and they had all these energies attached to them and then they died, but those energies are kind of keeping them on the mortal plane. Sometimes you see spiritualists and mediums saying, you know, go to the light, move on, move on. And you might get the answer of, I can't, something's holding me back. And that can be a kind of energy. Sometimes it's a soul that's otherwise influenced. Souls want to move on unless there's a specific reason for them to stay behind. I cannot iterate this enough. For all of the negative out there, there's a balance of positive. It is just a matter of finding it and growing it. All of these things can be grown, and it's important to do your homework and to be good to yourself. Find your balance, live your life, be respectful of the dead on all tiers, and don't forget that you are important and that you matter throughout all of it. I hope you have enjoyed this episode of Question and Answers. And you'll notice too, I'm in a really casual atmosphere, and part of that is due to my voice being pretty rough right now. I have been traveling a lot. I have been to Boston, London, New York, Austin, and Asheville. I'm going to keep releasing new content that is both on my photos, looking at those on an investigation sense, stories from all the locations that I mentioned. I will keep answering your questions. Remember, you are welcome to email me. You're welcome to follow my TikTok, my Instagram. I love to hear from all of you, and I like to keep up and keep updating things as much as I possibly can. Last of all, as you know, all of this is being done on my own dime. If you are feeling generous, I will never say no to tips. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again for Rebekah the Ghost Guide next week, every Thursday at 4. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to follow along for more, please consider subscribing down below. I've got a lot of really cool content that's about to come out, not to mention travel content as well. So I'm going to be traveling to some different cities and telling ghost stories from there. Thank you again for following on TikTok, on Instagram, and for emailing me stories, personal accounts, and photos and videos. I love seeing what you have to share with me. Thank you so much. And lastly, if you would consider contributing to me making these videos, each one takes about 10 hours for me to do, and this is on top of all of my day jobs. Anything that you can contribute means less day job for me and more videos for you. Thank you so much.